Kelley Ford, segment number 2 on your radio. Kelley, we might get off into the defenses. You said that you had kind of a rough draft that you feel pretty good about, at least to talk about on the Southeastern Conference. I do want to kind of go there with you. So, kind of take us through what you're seeing as we head towards summer with the SEC.
Yeah, so, Jake, again, as we talked about earlier, getting really close to the 2024 preseason ratings, version 1, power rating for all the teams. Feel good about where I am really with the Power 5. And with your neck of the woods there in the SEC, thought we might want to talk about some of the kind of the tiers, if you will, of SEC teams right now based on what I'm looking at. So for me and my numbers, and again, Jake, this is a combination, going back to what we talked about before, it's a combination of power ratings, so how strong is any given team projected to be, but also almost equally importantly, it's their schedule that they're going to play. Because even though all these teams are in the same conference, they do not play equal schedules because of those two things. Georgia and Texas, those are two teams that most people, including myself, are going to have, at the top of their power ratings in that top 5. Georgia is certainly going to be number 1 for most, including myself. But when you look at the schedule that Georgia has to play within the SEC and you compare that to Texas, they actually end up pretty darn close with regard to projected conference wins by my numbers. I mean, those two teams are neck and neck right now for me at the top of the conference with regard to projected wins. Georgia, of course, on paper, the better team, but Texas might have the easiest schedule in all of the SEC.
No, I agree with you. And I'm sitting here, I just pulled up my stuff here on the quote-unquote hourglass that I run, and would 100% agree with what you said. I mean, Georgia, a little bit better as far as a football team, but when you look at schedules, I mean, they're bookend like literally the whole conference. I mean, Georgia, Florida at one end, Texas, Missouri, for me, right there at the other end.
Yep, 100%. So that, to me, is how you get Texas and Georgia kind of, I'll call that tier 1. And we're splitting hairs here in the SEC. There's so many good teams. If you want to draw a dividing line with only 2 making the conference championship game, those 2 teams right now, probably the odds-on favorites to make it to Atlanta and play in the SEC championship game. For me, then, there's a bunch of teams right after that. Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri. Again, all for, a combination of reasons. The projected strength of those teams and the schedule they play. You mentioned Missouri certainly has one of the easier schedules in the conference as well to go with Texas. Like you said, I agree with that. Those are probably the 4 teams that I'd have kind of in that next step down. Wouldn't be surprised at all if 1 or 2 of those teams played for the SEC championship in Atlanta. But just right now, as we're still 3 months away from the start of the season, they're probably a half step behind Texas and Georgia for projected strength and also combination of strength or schedule difficulty, as I call it. So Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri, kind of in that next group for me.
So Alabama, Ole Miss, you said Texas A&M and Missouri?
LSU and
Missouri.
Would be those ones, yeah. Texas A&M and Tennessee, Jake, they would comprise the next tier, and they'd be by themselves for me. So if you're looking at kind of a tier 1C or a tier 3, if you want to call it that, it'd be Texas A&M and Tennessee. Then there's kind of a significant drop down, and it's about a game, that's a large difference when you're talking about an 8-game conference schedule, which of course the SEC is playing. Once you get after Texas A&M and Tennessee, it's about a 1-game drop to that next group of teams that includes, Oklahoma and Kentucky. So that's going to surprise some folks, I think, when I debut this later this week, is where Oklahoma falls, because Oklahoma's a really good team. They play a really difficult schedule within the SEC, and because there are so many really good teams in the SEC, Oklahoma can be a top 15 or top 20 team nationally, but still be in the bottom half of that conference because of just how good that conference is. So I think some people might be surprised to see Oklahoma where they are in my projections. I haven't even mentioned Auburn, Florida, 2 teams that, again, on paper should be pretty darn good. Florida might have, or probably does, I think I could say that definitively now, have the most difficult schedule in the entire country. It's absolutely brutal for the Gators, and it's been that way for a couple of years now. 2024 is no exception. Jake, a lot of your listeners probably want to know Mississippi State. Mississippi State, as I go to their actual team page here in my computer on my end, they are right now for me, projecting to be in the mid-60s. So about FBS average, but when you stack that up against other teams in the SEC, it might be that, Mississippi State's only projected to be better than Vanderbilt this year. And again, as I go down their schedule, it's not easy, right? I mean, any conference game that you're looking at right now, my numbers make the Bulldogs most likely an underdog in all of them. The home game against Arkansas looks like the most winnable. My numbers there in week 9, but it's a really difficult schedule for Mississippi State. So a decent team, but when you look at the SEC standards, just not quite there, at least by my projections right now, looking at 2020.